Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Fosgail Mindset. I'm Myka Kennedy Stephens, founder and CEO of Fosgail. If you're watching on YouTube, you're still seeing me on video as we continue this new season. If you're listening on Podbean or your favorite podcast app, the format will feel familiar. This is a reflective space to think together about leadership in libraries and education. If you're new to the Fosgail Mindset, welcome. This podcast is for listeners who recognize themselves in the realities of libraries and education, navigating change with limited resources, holding a deep commitment to learning and justice, and trying to keep communities engaged without burning out in the process. Before we dive into today's topic, I'd just like to mention that you might notice a few quirks in the music timing during this episode. I am still trying out a new recording and editing workflow. Just consider this part of the experiment in more sustainable real-life podcasting. In our last episode, I introduced Attendant Leadership as a more holistic, power-aware way of leading in mission-driven, knowledge-based institutions. Today, I want to build on that foundation by looking at how attendant leadership asks us to attend to relationships, not just our relationships close to home, but also our relationships with humanity and the more than human world. I'll be walking through my latest Fosgail blog article, Finding Our Place by Attending to Relationships, and using a story from my time as a seminary librarian to introduce two dimensions of relationality in attendant leadership: relational scope, which spans from self to community, and relational depth, which spans from humanity to cosmos. As you listen, I invite you to notice where you see your own leadership reflected and where these dimensions might help you find or re-find your place in the web of relationships around you. When I first started as a seminary librarian with responsibility to direct a theological library, the dean gave me a mandate: right-size the collection. The library had grown from modest beginnings in the 1820s and was a decade away from its bicentennial. Its physical size was over 200,000 bound volumes, books, periodicals, and special collections. In comparison to other seminaries with similar enrollment, which was fewer than 100 students and declining, the library was technically oversized for the school. While to some it might have appeared a bit overgrown, this was a curated collection of materials to which former professors and students had contributed over generations. Previous librarians had acquired the personal libraries of important collectors and scholars. The collection told the story of the school, of the professors who had come before, of the subjects that were taught, and of the viewpoints that were thought important to preserve. What business had I, a newcomer to this community, making decisions that would significantly change the shape and size of this collection? I felt both entrusted with great responsibility and also intruding a bit on a story that had begun long before me. Over the course of 4 years, I proceeded to right-size the collection as I had been asked to do. And in the process, I discovered how important relationships are. There were many relationships to attend to through the course of this work, with the seminary's administrators and trustees, with my faculty colleagues, with the library's staff members, with students and alumni, and with the library's patrons from the surrounding communities, with the collection itself, with the seminary's history, with the library building, with the environment, and surprisingly, with myself. Margaret Wheatley explores the fundamental nature of relationships in her groundbreaking classic, Leadership and the New Science. Drawing on quantum physics, she describes a world in which nothing exists in isolation. Everything takes shape in and through relationship. In a world that is defined and navigated by relationships, apparent polarities soften, revealing a web of complex and interconnected threads. In this web, relationship provides connection and potential, pathways to endless possibility. Attendant leadership sits on a foundation of relationality, the state of being part of an interconnected web of relationships. When we begin to understand that we are part of such a web, we see that we do not exist in isolation. Hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of invisible threads link us to people, places, and more. We feel the effects of changes, decisions, and events involving the people and things that we're linked to, just as the changes, decisions, and actions in us are felt by others. When we think about our leadership, relationality takes on greater importance. As leaders with agency, we can begin to see how our actions influence our relationships and how we are influenced by those we are in relationship with. When we exercise power as attendant leaders, we feel a responsibility to act in ways that avoid or reduce harm across this web, and to pursue service, justice, and peace wherever we can. Visualizing this interconnected web of relationships is complex and messy. It is self-organizing chaos, to borrow another image from Wheatley's work. In order to make sense of it in a way that lends itself to a visual map, I've grouped relationality for attendant leadership into dimensions. Both dimensions trace movement between the micro and the macro, from what is individual or local to what is universal or global. One dimension of relationality explores the scope of our relationships, with self on one side and community on the other. The movement between micro and macro for relational scope takes us between our individuality and what it is to be in community. Attention to relationship with self pertains to self-awareness and identity. For example, how we attend to our energy, identity, trauma histories, and bias before walking into a meeting. Attention to relationship with community involves recognizing the diversity of communities to which we belong and understanding our interconnected roles in each. For example, how we hold our roles as colleague and supervisor, or as a manager, director, or dean, and also as a member of a wider staff, faculty, or consortium. The second dimension of relationality explores the depth of our relationships, with humanity on the one side and the cosmos on the other. The movement between micro and macro for depth takes us between our human experience and what exists around us, and beyond our immediate human systems, our planet, the universe, the past, and the future. Attention to relationship with humanity helps us to understand the systems that we create and participate in, as well as our role in preserving them or changing them. For example, a human system that librarians regularly relate to is the controlled vocabulary used for subject headings in bibliographic records. Attention to relationship with the cosmos helps us to see our involvement in and impact on systems and dynamics that are much larger than humanity. For example, how we balance the environmental impact of print collections and the digital infrastructure needed to maintain large databases and LLMs. When you look at the illustration of attendant leadership that is beginning to take shape with these micro and macro lenses, you see a two-dimensional matrix. I am aware that this is an oversimplification of the complexity of relationality in attendant leadership. The diagram risks suggesting fixed poles and tidy categories, but each endpoint is really a cluster of many different relationships. I'm using this two-dimensional model not because it captures the full complexity of relationality in life and leadership, but because it helps me notice where my attention is going and where it isn't when I make leadership decisions. I started off recalling the time when I was asked to right-size a mature theological library collection so that it more closely matched the needs and available resources of a shrinking theological school. Leading that effort involved maintaining many community relationships, as you might expect. Many voices needed and wanted to be included in the decision-making process. Library staff felt the burden of additional work and needed support. The sight of emptying shelves elicited various responses from patrons, from concern to outrage, from anxiety to indifference. It would have been easy to stay in that space, attending primarily to these communal relationships and relying on them to provide all the feedback I needed. Had I done that, the result would have been less balanced. Attending to humanity invited me to explore how the knowledge and information held in the collection could continue to serve human flourishing, even if we could no longer maintain research-level depth in many of the subject areas. Attending to the cosmos invited me to consider the environmental impact of deselection and to seek creative ways to reuse and repurpose items that could not be sold or given a new home. Attending to self, as uncomfortable as it was, helped me to manage this large project with grace for my own limitations, space to make mistakes, and permission to grieve what the collection had been so that I could help it become something new. Taken together, these dimensions of relational scope and relational depth became a way of finding my place in a much larger web, with myself, with my communities, with humanity, and with the more than human world. As you think about your own leadership context, where do you notice yourself most strongly attending right now? Self, community, humanity, or cosmos? And what might shift if you treated your next difficult decision as an opportunity to relocate yourself within that web of relationships? Thank you for spending this time with me. If you'd like to sit with these ideas a bit more, you'll find the full article, Finding Our Place by Attending to Relationships, on the Fosgail blog. There's a link in the show notes. This episode is part of an 8-part series on attendant leadership, and in our next conversation, we'll continue unpacking what these relational dimensions look like in practice for leaders in library and education. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from you. As you think about your current context, where do you notice yourself most strongly attending right now? Self, community, humanity, or cosmos? And what might shift if you treated your next difficult decision as an opportunity to relocate yourself in that web of relationships? You can share your reflections in the blog comments, inside the Fosgail community, or by connecting with me on LinkedIn. If you'd like a gentler, more supported way to keep engaging with these ideas, you're warmly invited into the Fosgail community. It's a reflective space for leaders who see themselves in the realities of libraries and education, navigating change, limited resources, and the work of keeping communities engaged. With open membership, you'll have access to a self-paced orientation course and our Open Connect space with regular prompts, polls, and shared resources to help you stay engaged without overwhelm. We also now have available full network membership for those who join us for a workshop or for who prepay for workshops and courses in our annual membership. And if email is more your speed, you can subscribe to Openings, Fosgail's bi-weekly newsletter, for a brief personal note, a summary of new articles and podcast episodes, thoughtful questions to ponder, and highlights from the community. You'll find links to both the Fosgail community and the Openings newsletter in the show notes. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Fosgail Mindset. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast apps so you'll receive new episodes as they drop. Until next time, may you find open possibilities in the ways you lead and the communities you serve.